by the end of class, what I'll do is I'll give you some time to work on your project. Okay, so that project I posted yesterday, I'll most likely, depending on how far we get in the PowerPoint, I'll just stop and say, all right, because they're not, no. What, say it again?
The random number, like
yeah. So I'll give you time to start your research. Obviously, if you don't have a poster board in here, but at least you can get your research done, and then when you do get your poster board, it'll be a lot easier for you to get that started. So yeah, we'll take some time today to get you raring to go on that one. So when I was doing the Zoom yesterday, that was the screen okay, connecting and everything. When I was, for some reason, period 5, like I was watching, I was looking at a recording of it, and literally all the words looked like they were in gibberish. Like you couldn't even see what the words were, and they're like, yeah, like it was just like I'm not saying like anyone Russian here. It looked like Russian. It literally looked like the words, like letters weren't connecting. I was just sitting there, just like, what? And they're like, because I forgot who said it to me, but they're like, yeah, Miss Langellas, I can't see what your thing's saying. And I was just like, what? And then I look back and I'm like, geez, like this is crazy. Can't even like piece together. They were just like, you couldn't read it. Yeah, they did. Like, but it took them a few minutes because I guess they just felt they felt nervous to say something to me about it. But I was just like, I was going along thinking everything was fine, and then they're just like, yeah, Miss Langellas, I can't see what's on the page. I think
they probably thought it might have been just their screen or something.
Possibly.
That happens to me a lot because my library's there.
I felt bad because I looked back like, yeah, this is horrifying. I can't even. So did everyone here get to do the castle learning?
Like random, like,
yeah, the pre-test thing.
Oh, that, yeah.
Okay, I'll make sure.
That it's fine for the month ago.
Yeah, just because I want to give the department the results, because it's like you've taken this before, pre-test just to see where you are located, like baseline. If you didn't do well, that's fine, because you're going to show growth at the end. You'll know a lot more questions than based on what I saw like a few days ago when I checked the scores. I was like, yeah, don't worry, you're wrong.
You try with that?
No, you don't have to try. Right, so did everyone get to do their discussion? Question? Okay, so let's talk about it. Okay, so obviously this is a pretty solid like activity just to get back into the groove of everything. So if you had to choose between which side had the more advantages, what would you say? And I know we're all kind of favoritism here. We're probably most likely going to pick one side. Union, why is that?
More resources when it comes to like weapon making. They have members of Confederacy, resources and factories and food produced and stuff. So they just help them with them quite a lot.
Yeah, a lot of resources, a lot of manpower, a lot of a lot of ability to kind of have weapons and bullets, and you kind of mentioned the manufacturing powers that they had. Though they did give them a clear advantage when it comes to specifically resources. Anyone else want to jump in on that? So anyone else here say Union? Who else said Union? You said Union too, Lorcan, you said Union?
I said Confederacy.
Ah, so let's hear it. Why Confederacy?
I said because, like, the war was mainly fought on their land, more to lose. Which I said I thought made the Confederacy, like, more threatening, like, the country.
Yeah, I think you can make a case for either way. I think if you were to say, who would you think would win in a short conflict? What do you think?
I'd say Union.
You said Union would win in a short-term conflict?
Yeah.
Why do you say that?
Because I think, like they said, they have more firepower.
Well, the reason why I say short-term, long-term, what do you think?
Like a short-term battle, like Canada.
Yeah. That was kind of the thing that I was kind of getting at. The fact that if it was a short term, like a 1 to 2 year battle, Confederacy would probably have the advantage, just because their troops were more skilled. They just think of it every day. They would go hunt for food, right? They go, the majority of the soldiers were Southerners, so they had a more experience. Their generals were the generals from all the major wars the United States has fought to this point. So they had more military experience, and they're fighting a defensive war. So they could have just won in a short span. But the Union had something that the Confederacy didn't, which is a lot more resources and a lot more capability of producing these things. So they could win the battle of attrition, the long-term fight, drawing this out longer than the war ever thought to be. And that's why there's a difference. Short-term, Confederacy probably had the advantage. Long-term, the Union definitely had the advantage. And that's kind of what we started to talk about a little bit. The Union originally thought that this would be a short-term thing and that they could just win like maybe 2 battles and then be over, but clearly that wasn't going to be the case. And we'll talk about how the beginning of the war really was pretty horrible for the Union to start out, but as time progresses, it actually benefits the Union in the long term. All right, so let's talk about some stuff here. So as I mentioned before class, we're going to start out with some of the PowerPoint. Your only homework tonight is to get started on your project, which is, remember, it's going to be counting towards next quarters, not this quarter, next quarter. And I'm going to give you kind of like the last 10 minutes of class to get started on research. So at least you can kind of get started, start to look up some information, and then you'll at least be a step forward when we get closer and closer to the due date. All right, cool. So the last time we were here, let me do this. Okay. The last time we were here, we were talking about kind of the beginning portions of the war. We mentioned the first major battle, which is the Battle of Bull Run. And in the beginning, the Union was actually doing a pretty good job in invading and kind of pushing the Confederates back. But we kind of mentioned last time that under Stonewall Jackson, who was the Confederate general, had mounted a counterattack which had pushed the Union backwards. And this was kind of a big blow to the Union because, like I said earlier, they first believed that this was going to be a very quick thing to deal with. Like, they thought this was going to be just a small-time insurrection, and that once they win like 2 battles maybe, it's over with. But this was proving to them that this was not going to be that at all. And this was going to amount to a long conflict that's going to drag over several years. And this was seen as the first major loss of the Union, which was pretty embarrassing. And they had to kind of revamp what their strategy was. And I mentioned yesterday that the first part of this was going to be called the Anaconda Plan. The idea that they're going to create a border, a blockade, around the entire coast of the Confederacy to stop them from getting resources, because they knew that the Confederacy doesn't have manufacturing plants. They don't have ways or means of making clothing, or ways of producing guns, ways of producing ammunition, and they needed to buy those things from foreign nations. So if they blockade them from getting those resources, they would win the battle of attrition, the long-term, draw them out and make them run out of resources. Secondly, they wanted to have the idea that once they take Richmond, then all things are over. But the problem is that obviously the Confederacy has a lot of defenses around Virginia. That's going to be their most powerful state. And at the same time, they have to worry about defending Washington, right, which is literally right next to Richmond. So it's not that far away. So they have to always constantly worry about them getting attacked at their capital versus attacking Richmond. And then the last part of their plan was to try to take the Mississippi River and then crash from behind, as in almost do like a sandwich tactic, a pincer attack, where they would have basically attack them from both sides, from the north and from the west. That'd be their way of really defeating them in all ways. Now, we'll talk about exactly some of the other strategies that they are going to use to help them win this war a lot quicker than they had originally had planned to. But it's actually pretty interesting. So let's get started with the Eastern campaigns. And so there's going to be 3 portions we'll talk about: the Eastern campaigns, the Western campaigns, and really the Anaconda Plan, and that'll be the first part. So let's first talk about the Peninsula, which is the Eastern campaign. Okay, now McClellan ends up becoming the major general that leads the Union, and you're going to notice really soon that the Union leadership is not really that good. And it's not because that they don't have experience, it's just because they make a lot of dumb decisions. And they start changing hands of leadership like all the time, all the way to the point where they get Grant. General Grant becomes the major general down the line, and he's going to be famous for his tactics that they use to help them win the war. But until then, you're going to see changing of hands. McClellan's going to be one of the first people. Now, McClellan was applauded for his concepts of basically wanting to train the entire military because they were so inexperienced Like, a lot of the soldiers in the North were made up of factory workers. They didn't really have experience fighting with guns. They were just kind of standard citizens that worked their entire lives, and now they're getting thrown into a war. And the Battle of Bull Run gave the Union the idea that these people don't even know what they're doing, so we need to train them. The problem is that when McClellan says we're going to take several weeks to get these people ready for their first battle, it gives the Confederacy enough time to now create a pretty solid strategy of creating defensive barriers around Richmond, which Lincoln gets really upset about. Now, what ends up happening once everyone is ready to roll, they do end up sailing 100,000 troops basically into the south, in between James River and York. All right. The problem is that during that time it took for McClellan to get his soldiers ready, the Confederacy, or I say the Confederate States of America, which is the CSA, launched a secret attack against Washington. This gets Lincoln so nervous that he's like, I have to withdraw like around 30,000 troops back to Washington so that they can defend the capital. This is a major problem, right? It's like this is going to be a constant trend when it comes to the early battles of the Union, right? Because McClellan taking so long had caused Robert E. Lee and other Confederate generals to basically mount a very smart plan to kind of throw the Union off its game, right? If they didn't defend D.C., this war would be over instantly, right? And that's like the biggest issue we start to notice. So at the point where they stop them from getting to D.C. is at the Second Battle of Bull Run. Because Bull Run, if you take a look at the larger map here, Bull Run is located at this area, right? So that's right outside of D.C. So the point was, when McClellan was sending his troops to attack this way, Lee says, okay, I'm going to go this way and attack D.C. So then Lincoln's like, great. So now I got to send 30,000 troops back up north to defend at Bull Run again. Because Bull Run was, remember, the first battle that they had. Now, it feels like the Confederacy was just toying with them at this point. And basically, McClellan was forced to retreat, and because of this dumb idea that it took so long for them to really set an offensive attack, basically he was replaced with John Pope to be the major general that controlled the area. All right. Now, Robert E. Lee, as much as people despise him, he was a very smart general. He realized that this changing of hands is going to provide the Confederacy a pretty solid opening to really dive right in or cut into this disorder or chaos that's really emerging because of all this. So Pope, he basically draws him out into a trap and attacked his flank and was able to kind of cause a lot of death at the Second Battle of Bull Run. Now, basically at this point, Pope has to retreat and just set a defensive barrier around D.C. so that they do not attack the capital. Now, Lee thinks this is his chance, right? When they start to go backwards, Lee understands that if he goes deep into Union territory and has a major victory, this could change a lot of things for the Confederacy. Because you did your research. At the time, the British were kind of sitting there like, I don't know who to back right now, right? Because the British understand that they get a lot of their cotton from the Confederacy, from the southern states, and now that the fact that they don't want to really piss off Lincoln, who's the president, they're like in the middle of everything. But the Confederates think that if they can really have a big victory within the Union territory, the British will recognize them as being their own nation. So Lee says, all right, I need to win this major battle. So he tries to go deep into Union territory and results in the Battle of Antietam. So he wants to try to take D.C., and what ends up happening, and I'll show you here, the map at Antietam, all right, he ends up basically trying to get into D.C., right, or really deep into Union territory. So Lee ends up going from the Second Battle of Bull Run, going northward to try to go deeper and deeper into Union territory. And basically at the same time, the Union troops are following them, creating almost like a barrier wall to stop them from getting closer to D.C. And they end up meeting at Antietam, right, which is going to be right here. Okay. Now, at this battle is going to be considered one of the deadliest battles ever in American history. What ends up happening is once they meet here, they have one of this basically conflict with all these different types of weaponry, like a lot of cannon fire, a lot of new types of guns are being developed, a lot of these rifles that really destroy the human body. to the point where the bloodshed is horrifying. And there are pictures of these bodies. These are just all bodies in ditches. To the point where there were 22,000 soldiers that were killed, dead or wounded. In comparison, 6,000 were killed in D-Day. Right? Now, granted, there's some context here. D-Day, it wasn't Americans versus Americans. It was obviously Americans versus Germans. But 22,000 Americans died at Antietam. Even just taking half of that number, just say half, that's still more, right? That just shows you how deadly the conflict really is. All right? So, we'll just talk about this, and then I'll let you work on your projects, okay? So, obviously, what is the impact or the consequence of Antietam, right? Obviously, first major defeat of the Confederacy, right? Basically, the dumbest thing McClellan does. This was his chance to basically end Robert E. Lee. Take him hostage, make him, because he's the top general for the Confederates. But McClellan basically has some sort of like weird respect for Lee and says, I'm going to let him retreat, go back. Because like they both lost a lot of troops, and he's like, I'll just let you, like, honor intact, let you go back. And Lincoln was like, what did you just do? Like, he literally invaded the Union, and you let him walk back to the Confederacy? And he basically demoted him again. A general demoted twice in one war. That's the point of how horrible this start is for the Union. They literally have one general, fails at the Bull Run. All right, let's put McClellan in there. He fails one time. All right, you're demoted. The new guy comes in. He fails. All right, McClellan, you're back up top. Then he fails again. Like, all right, now I got to change hands again. Literally, the entire time, they just can't find a good general to lead them forward. Now, granted, this is still a big battle, a big loss for the Confederates. They do not have another major offensive attack into the Union since. This is a miscalculation by Lee. Granted, Lee, it took some guts to go deep into the Union. Problem is that he didn't have enough troops with him at the time to really stop this. Remember, that was one of the positives of the Union Army. A lot of people, right? It's almost like, I always compare this to World War II. A lot of times you're like, well, they're two completely different. Think of the Russians in World War II. Do you remember about the Russians and Germans, the differences? The Russians literally had so many people that they didn't have enough bullets or guns for them. And their strategy was, one guy holds the gun, the other guy holds the bullet. One guy gets killed, you pick up the bullets and you use it for your gun. Oh. Literally just send waves on waves of people into gunfire and say, they don't have enough bullets to kill us all. Just keep running. Just keep going. And literally, they were right. The Germans ran out of bullets. And they said, we can't kill all these people. And I'm not saying it's the same, but it's similar to the point where Lee did not have enough weaponry, resources, or men to take on the amount of people the Union had. Which is why the Union was successful at Antietam. Now, like I said, this is going to be a major loss for the Confederates, and we'll talk more about that when we return next time. So, like I said, start doing some research on your influencer. You have, literally, 10 minutes. I think, is it 54 or 58?
54.
54, right?
Yeah.
All right, so exactly 11 minutes, actually. So, yeah.
What size is the book?
Wait, say it again?
What size is the book?
What size?
Yeah, size.
They did not tell me his size.
Should be like one of those.
Is that can order up to?
Yeah, so take a look. Generally, think of it this way. The size, because we're going to be putting